folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner.
The blade is very sharp. I'm sorry. I'm not an intruder. I realize I must look like it, but I'm not. The girl, the young lady, invited me in. She's going to arrange a bed for me. But if I'm not welcome, but you are welcome. Before the castle was destroyed, strangers were always welcome. Please be seated. While your room is being prepared, you will take some wine. You have some beautiful things, all that was left. What happened exactly to the castle? May I introduce myself? My name is Carson, Paul Carson. This is Tanya. I am Dracula. I'm sure I'm putting you through a great deal of trouble. Your wine. No, thank you. I really must be going. Going? Well, yes. You must stay here. It's very kind of you, but I really can't bother you any longer. I'm sure I'll find a place to stay. There is nowhere else. Well, I'm a good walker, and my ankle seems better. This is not Kleinenberg. You are not acquainted with the countryside here. How did you know I was from Kleinenberg? You will accompany Mr. Carlson and show him to his room. Thank you for your hospitality. Well, good night then. Sleep well, Mr. Carlson.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Urshan. This week we are counting down the top 10 roles of Sir Christopher Lee. Yes, one of my all-time favorite actors, especially in the horror genre. Even though he's done all kinds of different film roles, he's probably best known for his work in the horror genre. With that being said, let's get to it with a couple honorable mentions. The first one being The House That Dripped Blood. From Amicus Films, one of their many anthology movies. And Christopher Lee plays John Reed in the section called Sweets for the Sweet. And he stays at the house with his young daughter, who's got a lot of issues. And he hires a woman to watch over her and kind of be her tutor, her mentor. And she ends up seeing Christopher Lee as kind of an abusive parent, you know. He's overbearing. And it turns out there's a lot more to this young girl than meets the eye. She turns out to be a witch. And she uses a voodoo doll to torture her father, stabbing the voodoo doll and burning the voodoo doll. And in turn, torturing Christopher Lee. So yeah, really fun film, great anthology, and Christopher Lee is great as always. And of course you gotta mention Christopher Lee as Count Dooku in the Star Wars franchise. I'd say kids that are born in the 90s, this is probably all they know Christopher Lee from, is his role in Star Wars. So he played Count Dooku in episode 2 and 3 in the prequel trilogy. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the prequel films, but I do enjoy his work on this film. I do enjoy him as Count Dooku, who is obviously inspired by his role as Count Dracula in the Hammer films. So that was really great to see him in Star Wars, just as Peter Cushing was in the original Star Wars. Alright, here we go. In at number 10 is going to be Scars of Dracula. From Hammer Films from 1970, obviously Christopher Lee plays the role of Count Dracula. And I'd say out of all the sequels in the Hammer Dracula franchise, this is the most underrated. Because Christopher Lee has so much more to do in this film than he does any of the other sequels. He has a lot more dialogue, a lot more character development. And he's just at his menacing best here. He's so brutal. And he's also very charismatic and charming as well. So you see both sides to the Dracula character here. And he does such a great job. In at number 9 is going to be Professor Karl Meister in The Gorgon. From 1964 from Hammer Films. I have that as part of this collection here from Hammer. So yeah, definitely love The Gorgon. Very underrated Hammer film about the mythological creature, the Gorgon, whose head is made of snakes, and when she stares at you, your eyes turn to stone. Well, actually, your whole body turns to stone, but yeah. But I feel like Professor Karl Meister basically steals the show, even though he doesn't show up till like halfway through the movie. And he's basically just shows up to kind of save the day, you know, because one of his friends and colleagues is murdered by the Gorgon, Madeira. And yeah, he comes in and he's just an expert in science and on mythological creatures, and he comes to save the day in a rare kind of good guy role for Christopher Lee. So yeah, he's just so charismatic, and even in a movie with Peter Cushing in there, he just kind of somehow he just like steals the movie. In at number 8 is going to be Caddis in The Mummy. He plays the creature in the film, and yeah, seeing him play a monster that has no lines. I mean, we do get to see him early on in the film before he becomes the Mummy, but yeah, he does such a great job as the monster. Just terrifying and extremely intimidating. And I love this version of The Mummy. It's my favorite version of The Mummy. So much more action, so much more intense, and you also got the great Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing together, and there's no better combination, right? And in at number 7 is going to be Professor Alexander Saxton in Hutter Express. Which is not a Hammer film, it's actually a Spanish production, but both Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing appear in this film, and it's such a fantastic film, based on the same story as The Thing from Another World and The Thing from John Carpenter in 1982. Yeah, but I love Christopher Lee in this film. He's so charismatic, so intimidating, and he's a genius, you know. And he's the one that discovers the creature on ice, frozen in ice, and he brings him up to the train so that he can take him back to his laboratory and, you know, experiment on him and learn what this creature is all about. And obviously things go horribly wrong. The creature is released and kills several people on the train. And it turns out that he is an extraterrestrial creature, and he can hop from body to body, you know, and possess people. And it's such a great film. Okay, in at number 6 is going to be Francisco Scaramanga from the James Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun. Yes, one of the most iconic villains in Bond history, absolutely. Even though this film is very underrated, he certainly stands out as one of the most iconic villains of the Bond franchise, for sure. Just because he's Christopher Lee is awesome, he's so charismatic and debonair and charming. He's almost like James Bond in a way, only he's the bad guy. And of course, you got probably his biggest role as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings franchise. Yes, he appears in the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, and he also appears in the Hobbit films as well, as the evil wizard Saruman, who is kind of the nemesis of Gandalf, of course. Absolutely brilliant in the role. He's just menacing as hell. He's just fantastic in every way. Christopher Lee is awesome. And in at number 4 is probably Christopher Lee's favorite Hammer role that he's ever played. As Duke de Richelieu in The Devil Rides Out. Excellent occult film. Yes, so he plays kind of the hero in this film as well. He comes in to save his friend that has kind of been corrupted by this evil satanic cult. And it just so happens that Duke de Richelieu is an expert on the occult and black magic, which is what his friend is mixed up in with this evil cult that actually conjures up the devil himself. So he does battle with Beelzebub in this film, and it's just great. And in at number 3 is the creature in The Curse of Frankenstein. Absolutely brilliant adaptation of the Frankenstein story, and kind of a remake of the Universal monster film. But what I love about this film is it actually focuses more on the Dr. Frankenstein character, but at the same time, Christopher Lee does an incredible job as the monster. And his makeup on this film is so grotesque and so cringe-inducing that he's hard to look at, and he's just terrifying. But he also portrays a certain fragile element as well, because the monster doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know why he's here, and he doesn't know anything about the world, so he's a fish out of water. So Christopher Lee definitely brings that element into the story, as well as being a menacing, brutal creature, you know. And in that number 2 is The Lord Summerisle from The Wicker Man, 1973. Absolute classic. One of the greatest British horror films of all time, easily. And this is Christopher Lee's favorite role that he's ever portrayed, and rightfully so. He's absolutely fantastic in this movie. And so his character in this film, the Lord Summerisle, is the exact opposite of The Devil Rides Out, which he was the hero in this film. He's the leader of the pagan cult. And what happens in the film is they prey on this guy, Sergeant Howdy, who is an officer sent to the island of Summerisle on a quest to search for a missing girl. And the whole thing ends up just being a ruse to lure him in, because not only is he a devout Christian, he's also a virgin, so they feel that his being so pure of heart would make the perfect sacrifice for their cult, so their crops will grow and they will once again have the ripe apples that they are famous for. Absolutely brilliant film, and absolutely one of Christopher Lee's finest performances. And in that number 1 is not going to be a big surprise to anyone who watches my channel, and that is Count Dracula in Horror of Dracula from 1958. Yes, this is his first go-around in the role of Count Dracula, and the finest. Not only the finest film in the Dracula franchise, but I think Christopher Lee's finest performance. He is absolutely blood-curdling and menacing in this film, and brutal. We also do get to see part of his suave and charming nature early on in the film. But yeah, he's so menacing, he's so incredible in the role of Count Dracula, and There's just nobody like Christopher Lee. He's absolutely brilliant. This is my favorite Hammer film. This is my favorite Dracula film, period. And it's also my favorite vampire film. Absolutely love horror Dracula. Absolutely love Christopher Lee in the role. And that's it for the top 10 roles of Sir Christopher Lee. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Gershon, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Towie. I trust the sight of the young people refreshes you. No, sir. It does not refresh me. Well, I'm sorry. One should always be open to the regenerative influences. I understand you're looking for a missing girl. I found her. Splendid. In her grave. Your lordship is a justice of the peace. I need your permission to exhume her body, have it transported to the mainland for the pathologist's report. You suspect foul play. I suspect murder and conspiracy to murder. In that case, you must go ahead. Your lordship seems strangely unconcerned. I'm confident your suspicions are wrong, Sergeant. We don't commit murder out here. We are a deeply religious people. Religious, with ruined churches, no ministers, no priests, and children dancing naked. They do love their divinity lessons. But they are naked. Naturally. It's much too dangerous to jump through the fire with your clothes on. But what religion can they possibly be learning jumping over bonfires? Parthenogenesis.
Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.thehorrorcona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.thehorrorcona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.thehorrorcona.com. Folks, don't forget to grab your Sean Patrick Gershon gear and represent the Horror Corner. Also, check out these awesome mugs we have. Perfect for your coffee. And definitely check out the Horror Hangout live stream t-shirt and represent the legacy of the Horror Hangout. Check out the link in the description below this video.